What can happen with account-based marketing is that you can get almost everything right, but because of one critical strategic error, you get no responses. So what some companies may find is that they start sending out LinkedIn messages, they start sending out cold mail, they start sending direct mail, and nobody responds. And this is the symptom sometimes of the following. Demand for some products and services surges after key trigger events. So for a lot of products, prospects just don't care about them. They're not on their radar. You can tell them about it all you want. You can do brand awareness campaigns. They just don't care. But there are key critical events where there's suddenly a surge in interest in those products, and you need to recognize if you're a product that fits this category. If you're a product where demand is very important, centering around a key trigger event, you need to fundamentally change your approach to account-based marketing. So let's look at a few examples of what those trigger events could be. So one of them may be that the prospect you're going after has set up a new website. Another might be that your prospect is undergoing a lawsuit. Perhaps they're doing a merger or an acquisition. Or maybe if you're going after small businesses, they just incorporate it. Or perhaps there's some sort of regulatory change that's happening, either legally through the government or on a marketplace or app exchange or something like that. So these are events that are happening to the company that are going to trigger interest in your product. And ways to identify these is to start with your customer relationship management system. I just pulled an example here from Salesforce. So what I would do is I would scour the notes that your sales team are leaving. And if you're just a small business, it might just be notes that you're writing or your own memory. And look for patterns about what were the triggers that got somebody to call, or that got somebody to email, or to request a demo, or something like that. And what you may realize is that the vast majority of prospects that are using your product and becoming paying customers are people that encounter key trigger events related to something like establishing a new website, maybe getting a new accountant, one of these key events. So if that's the case, and you have a list of companies that you're sending cold emails to, you're doing advertising to, just doing that on a broad base and hitting your target customers isn't going to work. You need to focus on the customers that are going through that trigger event. You cannot blast the market with awareness, with ABM tactics. It's not going to work. You need to hone in on trigger events, and there are some tricks and hacks we can use to do that. One thing I want to point out, though, if we look at the McKinsey business-to-business framework, almost all companies start their customer journey with some sort of trigger event. But there's a difference here. So for a lot of businesses that are doing ABM, the trigger is actually your activity. So somebody receiving a cold email, receiving a direct mail, receiving a pitch through LinkedIn, that's the trigger that can get the prospect interested in buying your product or buying your product category, and then they may start looking at competitors. But in a lot of cases, there are companies where the trigger event is external, and there's much heavier weight put on that external event because whatever the problem is that your product solves is most important when that trigger event happens. So let's say that you've identified that that is the case for your product. Maybe you didn't know it initially. Maybe you didn't realize that trigger events or seasonality were incredibly important with your product, but then you went through the CRM notes and you saw a pattern and you said, yeah, actually there are spikes in demand that correlate with some sort of key environmental factors that are happening in the market. So here are some examples of how you deal with that situation. And these aren't always obvious. So one of those is partnering with professionals. So there are certain professionals that your prospects trust and that they rely on to help them through that trigger event. So for example, if the trigger event is a lawsuit or a compliance issue, they're going to trust their lawyer. So if you're able to disseminate your message to the lawyers that carry influence around that trigger event, you're going to capture the share of voice in the market. Another case is web developers. So if people have set up a new website using a new CMS that integrates with a new ERP, something like that, you want to partner with those web developers because each web developer probably influences maybe 20 potential clients of yours. Other cases would be management consultants. So if you're going after the Fortune 500, let's take a look at what the management consultants are doing. How are they getting their message out? What are the kind of audience sizes that they have? And how can you influence the management consultants instead of directly going after the end user or the end buyer? So the ABM approach isn't always just directly going to the target accounts that you want. Sometimes it's indirectly reaching them through these professionals who have influence around that trigger event. Now, the last example I have here is just generally subject matter experts. And sometimes these subject matter experts are really well known because they're actually social media influencers or just influencers in general. For example, they may have a huge following on YouTube and be known for helping people solve events centered around key trigger events. They may be presidents of associations, or maybe they run very large agencies and they have a lot of clout, a lot of influence. They do a lot of speeches. Those are the kinds of people you want to partner with. In other cases, you're actually going to be doing partnerships with larger organizations. And it's not just the individual that you're associating with, but it's going to be doing full co-branded marketing with things like webinars that get your brand, your name, your credibility in front of those audiences when the topic of those webinars is centered around whatever that trigger event was. Like, hey, you just incorporated, maybe you should do X, Y, and Z, or hey, you've just been sued, here's how you comply with the law, and let's see if we can piggyback into those conversations with the professionals, with the influencers, with the people that already have credibility around helping people through those events. Another way of addressing this is by using intent data. So buying data to identify which of the target accounts that you're going after are actually in market, actively looking for a solution. That way you can focus your ABM energy on people that are actually highly likely to convert in the short term. Because if you just have a general message that you're sending out every day or weekly or whatever to people that are not in market, they're not undergoing that trigger event, you're being incredibly inefficient. And another example, this is a classic one, is Google Ads. So the reason Google Ads is great when there's a trigger event is because people are actively looking for a solution. You're not force feeding a message to them through cold email, through direct mail, etc. Instead, they're actively searching for either products or just in general solutions for how to deal with whatever that trigger event is. And lastly, I just want to say that inbound marketing in general, where the prospect is actively looking for a solution, is a great approach to trigger event marketing.